In this video, we're going to look at breaking even and how to analyse this. This is a really important concept for the entrepreneur to understand. So what is breaking even? What does this mean? Well, to start with, let's look at the all-important break-even point. So in simple terms, the break-even point is when a business is making no profit, but also making no loss. It is just breaking even. Its sales revenue and its costs are equal, so it makes zero profit. Now this might not sound very exciting to you right now, but as a young business, this break-even point can be a really big deal. Break-even analysis helps current and future business owners to make decisions and to forecast the potential profit that could be made from a potential venture. And just as importantly, how much would have to be sold before there is any profit to be seen. We're going to look at the break-even formula. This is really important to be able to use and will allow us to calculate the number of units that must be sold in a given scenario for sales revenue to equal total costs. As we now know, this is known as the break-even point. To all the teachers out there, show all of these videos without any ads and gain access to our growing library of over 500 teaching worksheets. Why not visit BizzWizard.co.uk to find out more? Before we get stuck into calculating break-even, let's first of all take a step back and look at what we mean by contribution. It's a key figure used in break-even analysis, so it's important to know what it is and what it means. Contribution is a very important financial concept in business. It looks at the profit made on each individual product sold, and it shows the entrepreneur how much each unit, each individual sale contributes towards covering the fixed costs of the business, and then how it contributes to profits once the fixed costs have been covered. You need two numbers to work out the contribution per unit: the selling price per unit and the variable cost per unit. You can then use the contribution per unit formula, which is contribution equals selling price per unit minus the variable cost per unit. So let's say that you have a selling price of £5 per unit and a variable costs per unit of £1. The contribution per unit per item sold will be the £5 selling price minus the £1 variable cost, which means the contribution is £4 per unit. In other words, each unit sold is making a £4 contribution towards covering the fixed costs of the business. Sometimes you might only be given the total sales revenue or the total variable costs in a certain question. If so, you will need to divide these numbers by the total number of units in that question to work out the sales revenue per unit and the variable cost per unit. So, now we've seen how we can work out the contribution per unit, and this is really important to keep in mind. The next stage is to work out the break-even point. The formula for this is break-even output equals the fixed costs divided by the contribution per unit. Now, be careful. Sometimes you might see this formula as the break-even output equals the fixed costs divided by the sales revenue per unit minus the variable cost per unit. But as we know, this bottom part is the calculation that we just did to work out the contribution per unit. Now, let's say we have the following information. Let's keep it really simple. A business has fixed costs of £100. They have variable costs of £1 per unit, and the selling price for this item is £5 per unit. So first, we need to work out the contribution per unit, and you already know how to do this. The contribution per unit equals the selling price per unit minus the variable cost per unit. In this case, that's £5 minus £1, which equals £4 contribution per unit. But we already knew this. So now you can use this figure in the break-even formula to calculate that key break-even point. As a reminder, the formula is the break-even output equals the fixed costs divided by the contribution per unit. We know that the fixed costs are £100. We've just worked out that the contribution per unit is £4. So the break-even output is £100 divided by 4, which equals 25 units. Now it's really important to know what the answer of 25 means. It's the number of units that the business needs to sell to break even. If the business sells books, it needs to sell 25 books to cover its fixed costs. At this point, if you wanted to know how much sales revenue would actually be made, you'd need to multiply the number of units by the selling price. In this case, that would be 25 units times by a selling price of £5 per unit, which equals £125 total sales revenue. You can also use this information to check your answer. We know that at the break-even point, the business makes no profit and they make no loss, so the profit should be £0. We also know that profit is calculated as sales revenue minus total variable costs minus total fixed costs. We've just worked out that the total sales revenue equals £125. We know that the variable costs per unit are £1, and we know that the break-even output in our previous calculation was 25 units. So the total variable cost would be £1 times by all 25 of these units, which makes £25. And we've been given the total fixed costs in the question, which were £100. So the profit, if 25 units are sold, can be calculated as, let's not forget, profit equals sales revenue minus those total variable costs minus those total fixed costs. So the profit is £125 minus £25 minus £100, and that means that the profit is £0. Bring this video and over 100 more to life with fun, interactive games, quizzes, and case studies. Why not try the first 25 completely free by visiting BizzWizard.co.uk. Now, we have that break-even point. In this case, 25 units. The business will be making nothing, but they'll also be losing nothing. So, we have that break-even point. In this case, 25 units. The business will be making no money, but they'll be losing no money. So, if a business is producing and selling more than its break-even level of output, more units than it needs to break even, in our last scenario, more than 25 units, then the business will be making a profit. And they also have what's known as a margin of safety. The margin of safety is the number of units that the business predicts to sell above their break-even point. The formula to calculate the margin of safety is margin of safety equals units sold minus the break-even point. So in this example that we've just worked through, we know that the break-even output is 25 units. If the business produced and sold 60 units, then the margin of safety would be calculated as 60 units minus 25 units, which means that they have a margin of safety of 35 units. So this means that the business is predicting to sell 35 units above that break-even point. Their sales could drop by up to 35 units below their prediction, and they still wouldn't be making a loss. However, if sales drop by 36 units or more, they would be making a loss, and therefore they would no longer be making a profit. The margin of safety is basically a measure of how well a business is performing compared to its break-even point. If a business has a large margin of safety, then it's performing well. It's selling much more than its break-even point. If it has a small or even no margin of safety, then the business could have some things to worry about. It's pretty simple. The break-even tells us how many items a business has to sell to get to the point where costs and revenue will be equal, where it's made nothing. Every sale past the break-even point is profit, and every sale below the break-even point is a loss. Now we're going to meet Holly Dando, the owner of a new luxury hairdressing business. Holly is creating a business plan that she can show to the bank in order to secure a startup business loan. You've advised her that it would be a good idea to include some forecasts of her revenues and her costs, including a break-even analysis. Holly has pulled together the key information needed. She plans to charge £60 per customer and has calculated that her variable costs per customer will be £20. She predicts that her fixed costs will be £50,000 and is forecasting that she will have 2,000 customers in her first year of trading. Okay, so keeping these numbers in mind, let's start by calculating Holly's contribution per customer. Her selling price is £60 and her variable costs per customer are £20. Don't forget that formula. Contribution equals selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. So Holly's contribution per unit, per customer, per haircut is £60 minus £20, which equals £40. Now that we know Holly's contribution per unit, we can work out her break-even point. How many haircuts does Holly need to do before she can break even? We know that Holly's fixed costs are £50,000 per year and that her contribution per unit, per haircut, is £40. Don't forget that the break-even output equals the fixed costs divided by the contribution per unit. So in this case, this is £50,000 of fixed costs divided by the £40 per unit contribution per customer, and this equals 1,250 units. What does this mean? Well, this means that if Holly has exactly 1,250 customers getting a haircut in her first year, she will make no profit and she will make no loss. In other words, she'll break even. If she has less than 1,250 customers, she'll make a loss. If she has more than 1,250 customers, she'll make a profit. Now, let's double check these figures. We know that at the break-even point, Holly makes no profit and she makes no loss, so the profit should equal £0. We also know that formula that profit equals sales revenue minus total costs, minus the variable costs and minus the fixed costs. We can work out the total sales revenue in this scenario at this 1,250 units by multiplying £60 by 1,250, which equals £75,000. Don't forget, we know that Holly's variable cost per unit is £20. So Holly's total variable costs are £20 times by 1,250, which equals £25,000. We also know Holly's fixed costs, which are £50,000. So the profit, if 1,250 units are sold, can be calculated as profit equals sales revenue minus total variable costs minus total fixed costs. In this case, profit is equal to £75,000 minus £25,000 minus £50,000, and that makes a profit of £0, which is exactly what we was hoping for. Next, let's calculate Holly's margin of safety. We've just worked out that Holly's break-even point is 1,250 units. She's actually predicting that she'll sell 2,000 units in this first year. So the margin of safety here is the units sold minus that break-even point. In Holly's scenario, her margin of safety is 2,000 units minus 1,250 units, which equals 750 units. So, Holly could sell up to 750 fewer units and still make a profit. But if she sells 751 fewer units than she's predicted, then she's going to make a loss. And that's quite a comfortable margin of safety for Holly to have. So now that we've looked at a worked example of how to calculate that all-important break-even point and also how to calculate the margin of safety, it's now time to look at the advantages of using a break-even analysis for businesses just like Holly's. Firstly, once Holly had pulled together the information she needed to carry out her break-even analysis, it was relatively quick and simple to calculate that break-even point and the margin of safety. It's a useful management tool, and it's helpful for decision making. Holly can see that based on her predictions, her business is likely to be profitable, and her bank will also find it useful when deciding whether or not to give her a loan. It's a way for Holly to predict the level of risk in her new business, as she can work out her margin of safety, and this should help Holly with setting aims and objectives. It shows her potential profitability, including how many units she needs to sell before she makes a profit. Holly could also look at the potential impact of changing her selling price and could use it to predict a new break-even point and a new margin of safety. And finally, it also highlights the importance of fixed costs. The lower those fixed costs are, the lower the break-even point is, and the higher the margin of safety. Lower fixed costs mean less risk to Holly's business. She will be able to see that if her fixed costs double, then her break-even point is also going to double. And this kind of explains why so many sellers, at least those who can, have moved online to avoid the cost of fixed premises. And that's not an option for a hairdresser, but it explains why many hairdressers have gone mobile and visit customers in their own home. This kind of analysis can help a business owner to weigh up their options and to make the best decisions moving forward. Each of the video courses over at BizzWizard.co.uk also includes an interactive business case study that applies the knowledge learned to a real-world scenario. There are over 1,000 multiple-choice questions, each with detailed feedback, which tests students' understanding of the content. Why not visit BizzWizard.co.uk to find out more? But, as always, let's now look at the disadvantages of using a break-even analysis for businesses just like Holly's. First of all, it's only a forecast. Until Holly opens her salon, she's not going to know exactly what all of her costs and her revenues will be, or how many customers she will really have. And costs can change. The products Holly uses may increase in price, or the cost of electricity for her salon may increase, or maybe decrease. You also have to keep in mind that the forecast assumes that there's only one selling price. Holly may actually decide to offer a student discount, for example. It also assumes that there's only one service, and in reality, Holly will offer a variety of different services, such as haircuts, colours, blow dries, all at different prices and with different costs. A break-even analysis can be quite restrictive for services, such as hairdressing, as prices can vary enormously. It also assumes that there are no defective products or refunds. No matter how good a hairdresser Holly is, at some point she will probably have to give a refund to a disgruntled customer. And finally, break-even analysis assumes that there are no economies of scale. Even with a service business like Holly's, costs of products are likely to go down on average as her sales go up, due to purchasing economies. So, to summarise, completing a break-even analysis and calculating the margin of safety can be useful tools for a business, as they give you an indication of how close to potential failure or problems your business might be. If you get a question about break-even or margin of safety in the exam, you should be able to define and calculate both. You should also be able to comment on whether there is a margin of safety, whether it's good or bad, and suggest factors that could impact and change that margin of safety. remember that the accuracy of the analysis depends on the accuracy of the predicted data used, on the selling price, on the variable costs and the fixed costs, as well as the expected number of units that are going to be sold. So when you're launching your own business, best of luck with your first break-even analysis. This has been the BizzWizard. See you